On this Wednesday night, trying to clear the air. Omicron and the confusion over new rules for travelers.
Things change on a daily basis.
As the U.S. detects its first case of the new variant. Plus, what is the point of travel bans? BC gets a reprieve from the rain. Now people are mopping up the mess.
It's fairly confident to say this is going to be the most costliest disaster in Canadian history.
Rare moment of unity among MPs. The unanimous decision to outlaw conversion therapy. Plus, from scams to spam and spoofs, they're the worst.
It's a nuisance and it can be kind of dangerous.
The pitfalls to the technology meant to dial up relief from robocalls.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We continue to watch the emergence of the Omicron variant tonight. It's been detected in at least 24 countries now, including Canada and the United States. The first case identified there is a fully vaccinated person in California who traveled from South Africa and who has only mild symptoms. The U.S. has since banned travel from Southern Africa. Here's what Dr. Anthony Fauci said today about that.
No one feels, I certainly don't, that a travel ban is going to prevent people who are infected from coming to the United States. But we needed to buy some time to be able to prepare, understand what's going on, what is the nature of this infection, what is the nature of the transmissibility.
The WHO said today some of those answers will come in a matter of days. Canada, too, has banned travelers from 10 African countries, including Egypt, even though there are already confirmed cases here. And new testing requirements are being put in place for everyone who flies into Canada from countries other than the U.S. They'll have to take PCR tests on arrival, but the details of how that will work and why travelers from the U.S. are exempt are among many outstanding questions. Abigail Bimman begins our coverage tonight.
Well, I brought some books and my laptop, so if I get stuck, I can work.
Travelers leaving Edmonton are bracing for whatever potential measures may be in place when they get back.
Things change on a daily basis.
With some annoyance over the new rule that they'll have to take a second PCR test upon arrival back in Canada and isolate until it comes back negative.
Well, I think it's very disappointing because I don't think it matters where you're coming from. I mean, I could get it at Costco.
I've had all my shots, my booster. I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and I want to start living my life. I don't have that many more years.
Testing all passengers is not happening at this airport yet, and few details overall as the industry worries about disruption and backlogs and the holiday season nears.
Today is our first call with the government to understand what the intent is.
Two industry sources tell Global News testing measures are expected to come into force this weekend. The government will only say capacity is already increasing.
It will take time. The speed of implementation will also vary in local airports.
As for Ottawa's rationale behind new rules, officials want more time to better understand the new variant, accepting it's already here.
Those might buy us some time. The spread is inevitable.
On border closures, the WHO is clear.
Blanket travel bans will not prevent the international spread of Omicron, and they place a heavy burden on lives and livelihoods.
The variant's already here, and it's going to spread now based on local transmission and not so much on importing transmission.
One potential loophole, new border testing rules don't apply to people coming from the United States.
That's a conversation we'll continue to have right up to today and tomorrow.
We need to be prepared and ready if we need to adjust that decision to include travelers from the U.S.
Ministers will only say the situation is fluid and they're watching what's happening south of the border closely. Meanwhile, the entire travel industry and many Canadians are waiting for specifics on how the new rules will work and when they'll be in place. And now that it's December, what to do about potential holiday travel plans. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
South African officials have described the travel bans as unduly punitive, especially since Western countries have failed to deliver sufficient vaccines and logistical support to Africa. And Dutch authorities say the Omicron variant was already present in the Netherlands before South Africa alerted the world about it. As Michael Couture reports, the WHO is calling on wealthier nations to do more to help others before offering booster shots to its own citizens.
All of us are either in this together or we're not. You cannot have a pandemic in part of the world and not in others.
A call for more collaboration from the World Health Organization. As more cases of Omicron are confirmed in more parts of the world, vaccine nationalism is growing and more jurisdictions are looking at widening booster programs.
We're continuing with our booster dose strategy as well. We'll have more to say about that with respect to age categories within the next few days.
That's in spite of the WHO asking countries to instead divert doses to lower-income nations.
Right now, there is no evidence that I'm aware of that would suggest that boosting the entire population is going to necessarily provide any greater protection for otherwise healthy individuals.
Despite millions of doses being donated, global vaccine inequity remains massive. Consider that just 1.7% of Nigeria's 200 million people are fully vaccinated. Compare that to more than 75% of Canadians.
I'm just coming out of Yemen, 0.5% of the population is vaccinated. So, it's a humanitarian nightmare.
Ethicists and epidemiologists say unvaccinated populations become breeding grounds for variants. Our Minister of International Development says Canada has enough doses for boosters and donations.
We've committed up to, right now, up to 200 million doses, the equivalent of 200 million doses. But we're more importantly working with the World Health Organization through COVAX to making sure it's an equitable distribution.
But experts maintain vaccine equity should be seen as a threat here at home.
If you're in a crowded building and you say your neighbor doesn't want to buy a smoke alarm or a fire extinguisher, you would say, well, I'll buy one for them and make sure that I'm safe. And it's exactly what we have to do here, is vaccinate the world to protect ourselves.
And until vaccines have reached every part of the globe, everyone everywhere can still be susceptible. Michael Couteur, Global News, Ottawa.
Turning now to storm-battered British Columbia. The province is dealing with the third atmospheric river in a series of back-to-back storms that have drenched much of the coast for more than 2 weeks. It's caused more flooding in already waterlogged areas like Abbotsford and the surrounding farmland of Sumas Prairie. As Heather Yourex-West reports, that's making it difficult to look ahead to recovery.
This is Abbotsford underwater again. It's been more than 2 weeks of dealing with heavy rain, evacuation orders and flooding, and the constant stress and anxiety is taking a toll.
So this is the top of the water.
Rich Van Laar's dairy farm was among the many operations in the Sumas Prairie overwhelmed by floodwaters. For 3 days, the farm sat under almost a meter of water.
I had 16 calves in my garage in the house, so nice amount of noise in the house.
Since then, back-to-back storm systems have made it almost impossible to focus on recovery.
We've been in the cleanup process ever since the big one hit here, and just hoping it doesn't come back.
Water from the Nooksack River in Washington State has now made its way to this part of Abbotsford near the Trans-Canada Highway. It's flooded this side street, but the water is still moving, traveling down into the Sumas Prairie before heading into the Fraser River.
Highway 1 through the Fraser Valley remains closed between Abbotsford and Chilliwack. The Tiger dams that were set up there on Sunday night are in place and have been effective in preventing the roadway from being flooded.
On Tuesday, a small number of homes were evacuated because of localized flooding. But overall, the city says its infrastructure has been coping well this round. The relentless rains scarring and submerging the landscape as people here now start planning to move on.
In British Columbia's flood zone, communities are isolated and struggling to survive.
The situation obviously is evolving, not over days here, it's evolving within hours and minutes and changing.
Highway 7, a crucial artery in BC, has been hit by a landslide.
Of course, we know with the Trans-Canada closed, we know how important Highway 7 is as the only road corridor where essential goods can move out of the Lower Mainland.
The Coquihalla, which is a connector between Vancouver and the rest of BC, is still in pieces and won't reopen for months. Already, reconstruction bills are adding up, likely to reach the billions.
It's fairly confident to say this is going to be the most costliest disaster in Canadian history.
That's because at no time in history have so many different communities been hit with one disaster.
It is not cheap to rebuild roads, to rebuild road lines, to rebuild dikes.
It's not lost on federal politicians that just about every route from BC to the rest of Canada has taken a hit.
CN Rail is still not operating. CP Rail is moving ahead.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline is still offline after the latest bout of bad weather, delaying fuel already being rationed that is in short supply.
The significant weather that we have seen continues to create challenges for Trans Mountain and the transport of fuel through the pipeline.
Suffice to say, normal life is going to be disrupted for a long time. Even the leaders trying to manage this disaster are struggling to stay afloat.
We've got to get through today, and then we've got to get through tomorrow.
And many more tomorrows are ahead with the rain that hasn't stopped its reign of destruction. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
In Newfoundland and Labrador, cleanup efforts are still underway from a powerful late November storm. Today, there was some good news. A portion of the Trans-Canada Highway near Port aux Basques reopened to one lane of traffic. Record-setting rainfall washed out 4 sections of that highway, cutting off the community from the rest of the province. Normal ferry service from Port aux Basques to Nova Scotia is expected to resume tomorrow. A new study is painting a dim picture of what's expected to happen in the Arctic. Researchers from the University of Manitoba project rain will become more common than snow in the Arctic 1 to 2 decades sooner than previously thought. The study, published in the journal Nature Communications, predicts the shift will happen between 2050 and 2080, depending on how fast the planet warms. It would have huge implications, including permafrost melt and widespread flooding. In August, the summit of Greenland's ice sheet experienced rainfall for the first time in recorded history. Huawei has been waiting years to find out if it will be allowed into Canada's 5G network. Coming up, what the delay on the decision could be signaling. The Women's Tennis Association is suspending all tournaments in China, including Hong Kong, over concerns about the safety and well-being of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. Peng has appeared on video but has not been seen in public since the beginning of November, when she accused a former high-ranking Chinese government official of sexual assault. The Tennis Association says it has serious doubts she is free, safe, and not subject to coercion, and it fears the potential risk to other tennis players and staff in China. The long-awaited decision on whether the federal government will ban Huawei from Canada's 5G networks is expected to happen in a matter of weeks. The US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand have all banned or restricted the telecommunications giant because of concerns the network could be weaponized by the Chinese government. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, is with me now. David, where does Canada stand right now on Huawei?
Well, you know, Donna, many in Canada have the same fear that Huawei's gear, if installed in the main hubs or core of our telecommunications networks, could be used by the Chinese government to spy on Canadians.
We continue to follow the advice of our science, our experts, our intelligence and security analysts. We're working with the various telcos to ensure that there's a competitive environment, but that, of course, the safety and protection of Canadians is always there.
Now, Huawei, for the record, swears its gear will never be used for spying. But the Canadian government is also worried that banning Huawei could spark a backlash by China, possibly involving retaliation against Canadian companies or Canadian sectors. And so there are those on Parliament Hill, even inside the Liberal caucus, who say the Trudeau government's long delay on making a decision is, in fact, the decision. The delay has had the effect of banning Huawei without explicitly doing so, as telecom companies like Bell and TELUS started buying 5G gear early last year from other vendors like Europe's Ericsson. Still, Ottawa will have to formally make a decision one way or the other, and that decision is expected in a few weeks.
It's one of the most consequential decisions for Canadians for generations to come.
Now, the US and Australia have, in fact, banned Huawei from their national networks. The United Kingdom has partially banned Huawei. So, perhaps by the end of the year, we'll find out how bold Canada will be on this. Donna?
All right, David Aiken in Ottawa, thanks. The diplomatic dispute between the U.S. and Russia has reached a new level. The Kremlin has ordered some American embassy staff to leave Russia by the end of next month. U.S. diplomatic staff that have spent more than 3 years in Moscow have to leave by January 31st. The White House ordered more than 50 Russian diplomats to leave the U.S. by June 30th. The Biden administration says the Russian embassy staffers must fly home because their visas are expiring. The Kremlin says Washington's refusal to extend those visas amounts to expulsion. The U.S. and Russia are set to hold diplomatic talks tomorrow. Choice in jeopardy ahead. The Supreme Court battle reignites over American abortion rights.
There being no dissenting voice, I declare the motion carried.
A rare moment of unity and celebration in the House of Commons today. MPs unanimously passed a bill to ban conversion therapy, the discredited practice of trying to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity. There were hugs across party lines after the vote and some tears of joy in the foyer.
It's just a wonderful day for kids growing up in a world that I didn't grow up in. And it's a pretty great day.
The bill will now move to the Senate. In the U.S., a landmark court ruling guaranteeing the right to abortion is being tested nearly 5 decades after it passed. Over the years, a vocal minority of social conservatives have gained political power and chipped away at a woman's right to choose. In some American states, access to abortion is now severely restricted. And as Eric Sorensen reports, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to decide whether to restrict it even further.
It is the most vehemently contentious law in American society, abortion as a woman's basic right.
My rights as a pregnant person come first.
Overturning or limiting the law could split the country.
There are 24 states poised to ban abortion if this law is upheld.
This is a historic day for the pro-life movement.
Pro-life advocates want the court to uphold a Mississippi law that bans almost all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, even those caused by rape or incest. Under Roe v. Wade almost 50 years ago, the Supreme Court limited restrictions before about 24 weeks, when a fetus was considered viable. Mississippi's Attorney General says times have changed.
And certainly, we know that life can be detected in the womb much earlier.
In the Supreme Court, conservative Justice Samuel Alito articulated one of the basic pro-life arguments.
The rights of personhood begin at conception or at some point other than viability.
Liberal Justice Elena Kagan suggested women's rights are at stake.
The autonomy and the freedom and the dignity of women to pursue their lives as they wish, to protect their bodily integrity.
But this is not the same court as 50 years ago. In 1973, the liberal-leaning Warren Court, by a 7-2 vote, made abortion rights legal in the United States. In 2021, there are only 3 liberal judges on the court. 3 conservative justices on the Roberts Court were joined by 3 more appointed by President Trump, creating a clear conservative majority.
So this is a very frightening situation right now for women in the U.S.
This legal scholar says new restrictions on abortion would change the perception of America as a leading light on women's rights. In Canada, there is no simmering debate among the major parties on abortion, but could a change in the U.S. stir things up?
If our neighbor next door does this, is there a risk that that will give more impetus to that kind of movement to start changing restrictions here?
The U.S. Supreme Court may stop short of overturning Roe v. Wade altogether, but some observers believe it will uphold the Mississippi law, and that could spur new anti-abortion laws across the country by next summer. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Repelling robocalls next, the new tech to stop nuisance calls. Will it work for everyone? You never know who is going to be on the other end when you answer your phone these days. Scammers and robocalls claiming to be everything from the revenue agency to the police are having a field day. There is some new technology that's supposed to stop them, or at least some of them. Ann Gaviola explains how it works.
The reason behind this call is that...
Do you ever feel like these are the only calls you get? 1 out of every 4 phone calls in Canada is spam or a spoof.
Our department has decided to suspend your social insurance number.
They're annoying.
This call is from Canada Revenue Agency.
And can be deceitful, with scammers posing as your bank, the police, or even federal agents.
It's a nuisance and it can be kind of dangerous.
These spoof calls, when they're making them, they're very threatening, they're very scary, and a lot of the times
People who get them are immigrants who have fought their way to come to stay in Canada.
They give talking on the phone a bad name. These calls are so pervasive, I got one during our morning meeting while I was talking about this story. Now, we were supposed to have national screening technology in place to crack down on these types of calls in 2019. It's finally here, but it's not going to work for everyone.
In order to send the kind of the proof of identity data along through it, there has to be an unbroken chain of modern telephone systems from beginning to end.
So if the caller or receiver is using a landline, it won't work. No dice. If the call's coming from outside Canada, it might not work either. Can nothing stop the scourge?
Universal call blocking, that is a system that is put in place for carriers to ensure that calls that are made traditionally through landlines, even over voice over internet protocol, there is a way of blocking those calls and making sure that those calls are not spoofed.
It's not going to protect you from someone talking you out of your money on a fraud.
Though the screening tech is mandatory, consumer advocates say some companies may try to sell you their own versions too.
The CRTC unfortunately didn't say that they can't charge for this new one. Some consumers might see this offered in the coming months with a $1 or $2 per month charge, maybe more.
So sorry if you can't get a hold of me later. I'm screening my calls. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this truck lit up for the holidays in Beaver County, Alberta. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.